Let's start the study of Jujigatami with the actual position we find ourselves in to finish. Now, one of the great themes that I'm going to push on you in this video is that in Jujigatami, the armbar situation, we must strongly distinguish between the mechanics of control and the mechanics of finishing. The arm bar, which actually breaks the elbow, is one thing, but the control, which makes that break possible, is quite another. It is absolutely critical, and if you walk away from watching this video with nothing else, walk away with this. You must learn the mechanics of control first so that you can work on the braking elements next. Don't just go straight to the brake. So often I see people shoot into an armbar and scramble for the brake, and it either works spectacularly very quickly or it doesn't work at all. What I want you to work with is the idea of building pressure and control over time that systematically enables you to brake people with a high percentage success rate, rather than a hit or miss approach where sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. The first big step that you need to make in this journey is to investigate and understand what it means to control someone in the Jujigatami position. Let's start in a situation where we have an opponent down and we've got him in the Jujigatami or cross arm lock. First, let's understand we're going to work from a full Jujigatami, where I have both of my legs across my opponent's body. One of those legs will be under his arm, and one of those legs will be over the arm, covering the head. Later on, we're going to see there are many different forms of Jujigatami. I encourage you, and we'll be doing so in this video, to learn all of them. They all have their place. But this is where we're going to start. The full Jujigatami, where I have two legs across, one under the arm, one over the arm, the head controlled. Your opponent will be forced at this point to go into some kind of defensive arm configuration. If your opponent is so naive that he doesn't put his arms in any kind of defensive configuration, it's pretty much over here. You're just going to take the arm back and put pressure on the arm. Unfortunately, very, very few of your opponents are that naive, so we're going to work in this position here. Okay, let's understand a few things right from the start. Whether I succeed or fail in this position is going to come down to one thing more than any other, and that is the connection of my hips to my opponent's shoulder girdle. Jujigatami is always understood as an attack on the elbow, and ultimately it is. But before there's an attack on the elbow, there has to be control of the shoulder. Your whole thing is to maneuver your body as close in towards your opponent's shoulders and head as possible. If we move around in this direction, you will soon see there is a direct relationship between the distance of my hips to my opponent's shoulder and my success rate with the move. The further my hips come out, the less effective my lever and fulcrum will be when I go to work in these situations. The easier my opponent's escapes will become, and the easier it is for him to slip his elbow inside my legs and escape. If his shoulders can turn into me, then he can pull the elbow free. So our whole thing is to constantly work to elevate this shoulder as much as possible and get our hips as far inside and underneath as possible. Your whole gambit to control this position is essentially methods of ensuring that this takes place. Again, it's all about how close I can get the pockets of my hip up to and even underneath my opponent's shoulder. That's our primary goal whenever we go to control someone in the Jujigatami position. Let me state this to you in the bluntest possible way. Your ability to control the Jujigatami comes down to your ability to control your opponent's shoulder girdle and head. That's the target of your control. That's your first target. And if that control is ever threatened, you should stop whatever you're doing and go back to that. So, when we start in this position, I am constantly moving my hips inwards towards my opponent. Your opponent will know this, and they will start shuffling always away from you. And there must be a constant movement in towards your opponent's shoulders. I will never accept a situation where I'm stationary and my opponent is moving away. That is a losing situation. Even if I do straighten out the arm now, it's so easy for him to start pulling elbows inside, coming up on top of me, etc., etc. Okay? Again, I will say this. It's so important. Your primary goal in the Judokatame position is to get inside and underneath your opponent's shoulder with your hips. The better the job you do of this, the better success rate you'll have with the elbow lock itself. So, changing our angle back, let's understand some groundwork in this position. Whenever we go to work in this situation, I have two legs. One of them is involved with controlling my opponent's torso. And in this situation, I usually refer to it as the torso leg for that very reason. Okay? I also have a cross-face leg, which goes across my opponent's head and shoulder line. It's designed to control the movements of my opponent's head and pin the head and shoulders. When my two legs work in unison, they give excellent control of the shoulder line and the head itself. Understand that Judokatame is essentially a pin of your opponent's head and shoulders. That's always what we're looking to do. At any given moment, I must have at least one of my arms inside my opponent's arms. I have two choices. I should be able to switch between the two at will. If I ever take my two arms out, that's it. You no longer control your opponent's elbows, and it's so easy for him now to turn into you and slip free. Okay? So it is absolutely critical that once we get the cross-face leg and the torso leg in place, there is always one arm going through. I generally recommend, if we go through, grabbing your own thigh so that you have a second hand free. Okay? Let's also understand that when my legs are symmetrical in this position, it doesn't create much pulling pressure, and my opponent can start to slip away from me and withdraw. So generally what we like to do is to work with misaligned legs, where I turn my legs in and hook like so. As much as possible, I want to have my two lower legs pointing in the same directions, so that when I kink my legs like so, I form a back heel where my foot comes back to myself to control the head, and the second foot back heels into the armpit. So one foot back heels to the armpit, the other back heels to the head. Now my legs are asymmetrical and my body is at an angle. When my opponent tries to work and pull away from me under these circumstances, it's very, very difficult because of the back heel effect where my heels come back towards my own buttocks. When he tries to move away across the mat, it's exceptionally difficult. When he tries to turn into me, I'm supported from behind by my elbow. If both of my hands are on him and he turns vigorously into me, I tend to fall. So generally we prefer to have a base of support behind us. And from this situation, we get enormous control over our opponent. So let's start off once again with our basic ideas here, the ones that we're working with. First, we have two legs. One we designed to control the top of the shoulder line and the head, and the other the bottom of the shoulder line and the armpit and going across the upper torso. So we have a torso leg and a cross-face leg. Once we've established leg position, it is critical at all times we have at least one arm inside his elbows, like so. Then from here, we want asymmetrical legs so that we can learn to back heel effectively with our legs like this. If my legs go straight and extended, it's very easy for my opponent to move around and resist me. We always want our body moving in, and from here, a back heel effect at the armpit and the head. So when my opponent goes to pull away, I'm locked in tight to his shoulder. Remember always that the shoulder is your primary focus for control. If you ever feel your opponent is shifting away from you, you will stop whatever you're doing and move back in towards your opponent. Okay? And as a result, we can keep a strong lock and hold our opponent in place. Very soon, we'll go on to additional elements of control, but these are the basic working points that you'll need when you begin your arm lock journey. Now, a skill that you must be able to develop and which will be of immeasurable value to you if you're going to call yourself a master of Jujigatami is the skill of moving while you're in the position. We've seen that ultimately every Jujigatami is the battle to control our opponent's shoulder. The general piece of advice I offer my students is we go to break the elbow, but the only route to break the elbow is to first control the shoulder. That means our hips have to get as close in to our opponent's shoulder as possible. So you know what your opponent's going to do. He's going to do everything he can to move his shoulder away from you. And it's going to come down to a battle. Can he move away from you more than you can move into him? Probably the single most common mistake that I see students who want to invest time in Jujigatami make is this. They think that once they've gotten the Juji position, the story is over. My buttocks are on the floor, I'm in position, and wherever we're at on the mat, that's where I break from. That is absolutely not the case. The story is just getting interesting at this point. This is not the end of the story. This is just where things start to get exciting. I have to be able to move in this position with his movements. Now you know already what his movements are going to be. They're going to be to move away from you. He needs to create space between your hips and his shoulder. So his whole thing is going to be to move in this direction and then ultimately to turn into me. Or, in some fascinating escapes we'll spend some time on later, turn out. But the first thing he's got to do is generate space. If I just accept that and just stay static and try to work from wherever I was, that's literally condemning you to failure right from the outset. If I work with symmetrical legs with two hands on his arms, like so, I can't move. And now the further he moves away, the more hopeless my situation becomes. It's so sad to watch so many Jujigatamis get lost because of this simple set of easily avoidable faults. If my two hands are on his arms, there's no base of support, I can't move. If my two legs are symmetrical, pointing straight ahead, it's very hard for me to move. So let's get around that. Instead, let's put one hand in and go down to an elbow and make our legs asymmetrical. Now, as my opponent moves away from me, I have an ability to move. What I do is I take my body, I put my foot on the floor, and I slide my hips in and relock. Every time I see him move out, I stop what I do, move my body in, and relock. When I lock, always the back heel is to the armpit and the head. So when he goes to move away from me, because I'm up on my elbow, I can easily move into him and then readjust my position. The movement involves going from what we call a power prop on my elbow to a post. If I stay on my elbow and my opponent moves away, it can be tough to move into him. So what I do is I move my head over his chest, my feet come in, and my hips slide. And this gradual incremental movement means that we can easily follow a resisting opponent who's moving across the mat. This is probably one of the least spectacular moves you will ever learn in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu, and yet its value is immeasurable. It will enable you to stay tight to your opponent's shoulder. That is the one thing you need to do above all others in order to be effective with Jujigatami. I'll show it to you again from a different angle. I apologize, it's not the most exciting thing to look at, but this is what's going to make you effective in an actual Jujigatami situation with a resisting opponent. So, we know what the problem is. The problem is I need to have my hips as close to his shoulder as possible. The shoulder is always the target of our control. He knows that, and he's constantly trying to move away. If I just stay with two hands here on his arms and my body symmetrical, it's so easy for him to walk away. And now I can't even follow him. I don't have a mechanism to follow him. And as a result, you're dooming yourself to failure. Instead, we go down to an elbow and we turn, make our legs asymmetrical, like so. Now, when I see him shuffling away, I come up to a hand and I put my head over his torso, and as a result, my hips can come off the mat and slide back into him and get closer and closer. Every time he goes to move away, I just repeat the process. And in this way, I can stay tight to my opponent And I never lose the single most important ingredient in all Judokatami attacks, which is control of your opponent's shoulder, your hips strongly connected to the shoulder. Now, let's talk about one of the great questions that I'm always asked every single time I go to teach Judokatami. Should I cross my feet or not? You will often hear people say, never cross your feet. You will often hear other people say, it's good to cross your feet. Intelligent people, highly respected people, both say the same thing. And the obvious question here is, who's right, who's wrong? My answer to this is simple. There's times when I believe it is useful to cross your feet. If you look at the evidence, there have been people who, at World Championship level, completely broke opponents' arms with crossed feet, and people who completely broke their opponent's arms with uncrossed feet. That should tell you right from the start, both of them are pretty damn effective. Here's my general spiel. As a general rule, in bottom position, I don't like crossing my feet. I'm not going to say it's 100% wrong to cross your feet, but as a general rule, I prefer open feet in bottom position. When I'm in top position, crossed feet can be a useful addition to your game, but it does change the game a little bit. You have to act a little differently with your legs when you cross your feet. Okay, we've got an opponent down on the floor. When I have dead symmetrical legs, this is good for breaking, but it's not so good for control. As a general rule, when we go to control people, I like to see my athletes work with asymmetrical legs, where my legs kink just in like so. Okay, I have two choices when I go asymmetrical. I can have knees pointing towards my opponent's hips, or I can have knees pointing towards my opponent's head. Okay, in both cases, my legs are now asymmetrical, and both of these I favor a lot. Okay. As a default, I normally go in this direction for reasons that will become obvious in a few minutes. When we lock in this position, there's an alternative where I can come back to a symmetrical situation, and from here I can go in to lock my feet. Okay, what do I gain when I do this? Well, one thing's for sure, you gain excellent control of your opponent's far shoulder, so that now both shoulders are being controlled more strongly than if I just have open feet. It comes at a price. When I lock like so, I no longer have such direct, firm control of my opponent's head. Okay. Now my opponent can turn into me a little more easily because the head can move a little more easily. When I have a cross-faced leg in place, the control over the head is very direct, but I sacrifice control of the far shoulder. If I feel I have an opponent who's interested in walking away from me, like so, this might well be a good time for me to cross my feet. I come in and lock, and I pull my legs back. Now I control the far shoulder. When he goes to walk away from me, he's not going anywhere. He's stuck in place. Okay? So this might be one example where cross feet is a good idea. If I have an opponent who I know specializes in turning escapes, where he goes to turn out in this direction in response to a Judokatami, this too can be a good time for us to cross feet. When I know my opponent is interested in turning out in this direction and my feet are crossed, when I go to separate here, the control over the far shoulder makes his turn out much more difficult than usual. So this too might be a good time for us to cross feet. One time I'm not a big fan of crossing feet is when my opponent's on top of me. In here. Okay. Now as he locks up and we go into the Judokatami, the one thing I really need in these positions is head control. And that's something I tend to sacrifice when I cross my feet in this position. There still is a kind of control of the head through my knee, but it's not as effective as situations where my feet are open and I can put my opponent down. Okay? So as a general rule, I tend to favor open feet when we're in bottom position, and I will often make use of crossed feet when we're on top of our opponent in a seated situation like so, okay, depending upon what I see with my opponent. There's no hard or fast rule to the question, is it right or wrong to cross my feet? I don't go with the crowd who says it's always wrong. Okay, first of all, there's a mountain of evidence to show highly effective arm breaks with crossed feet. Secondly, it just tends to change the nature of the control rather than to be all wrong or all right. Okay. When my feet are crossed, I still do have some control over the head. The guy comes in, I just open up my knees, and from the situation, you have excellent control. You do gain a lot of control over the far shoulder. These are all good things. However, when I feel people pressing up into me and I really want to control the head, I typically do go back to open legs, like so, and from here I get very direct control of my opponent. In addition, when I want to move with my opponent, open feet are obviously much better. If I see him moving away and my feet are crossed, I can make it hard for him to move away, but if he does actually get away, now I can't move. And so in these situations, this will be exactly when I heist my way back into a strong attacking position and lock up like so. Let's talk about a topic which I'm often asked about. This is the question: when I perform Juji Gatame, the armbar, should I cross my feet or not? And you will often hear strong opinions on this topic. Some people will say, no, it's always wrong to cross your feet. Other people say it's okay sometimes. Other people say you should do it whenever you can. And the natural question is, who's right? Okay, there's one way of doing things, several ways of doing things. What's the right one for me to use? Because people tend to have strong opinions on this topic, I think it's important we get it sorted out here. If you look at World Championship fighting, you will see multiple examples at the highest levels of people getting their arms broken, both in situations where the feet were crossed and where the feet weren't crossed. So that should tell you something right there. Both methods can definitely work. Okay, I'm not a big advocate of this idea that it's always wrong to cross your feet, nor am I a big advocate of the idea that it's always correct to cross your feet. There are clear empirical examples at all levels of both methods working. What I will say to you though is this: if you choose to cross your feet, there are times when it is not only permissible but useful for you to do so. There are some times when I don't believe it's useful and it should be avoided. And if we're going to cross our feet, let's make sure we do it in the right way. So with that little proviso in mind, let's now go into some examples of when we ought to cross our feet, when we ought not to cross our feet, and if we are going to do it, how are we going to do it? Okay, here's a general rule for you. If my opponent is flat on his back, cross feet can be a useful thing for me to work with. Okay, it's not the only way of doing things in Juji Gatame, but it can be a very useful thing for us to do. Okay, so here we have Placido down on his back looking to defend himself. First, why would I cross my feet? What's the benefit? Okay, well, we do know that Juji Gatame is a system of wedges around our opponent's shoulder and head. The wedges, as long as my feet are open wedges. And as a general rule, closed wedges are tighter and more controlling than open ones. So there's some benefit for me to draw the far arm in and take my cross-face leg and put it underneath the second foot and cross. Where I cross is very important. I don't want my cross below my training partner's shoulders. That's why we draw the second arm in. I want to put my calf muscle over the shoulder and I cross my feet in nice and tight and pull the feet inwards. Do not extend your legs. If you're going to cross your feet, don't extend the legs. Pull them in like so. Now this creates an interesting thing. That means that your knees will flare. And one of the great cliches of Juji Gatame is always squeeze your knees together. Okay, that's why a lot of people get upset when they see crossed feet, because it tends to put your knees in the exact opposite of what we always get taught. Everyone gets taught from day one, keep those knees close together, keep those knees close together. Suddenly you've got a situation where you're crossing your feet and your knees are actually splayed apart, the very opposite of what you got told since you were a white belt. And so you'll see people getting upset saying, no, this is completely wrong. No, it's not completely wrong. There's good elements here. You can get excellent control of both of your opponent's shoulders. When I perform with open feet, all of my control over my opponent's shoulder is on the near shoulder. Okay, I have no control whatsoever of the far shoulder. It's an open wedge at that point. When I close the wedges and lock up like so, now both of my opponent's shoulders are controlled to some degree. It comes at a price, and that price is cross-face pressure. It's not that you don't have any cross-face pressure, it's just that your cross-face pressure changes. Instead of being focused through the calf muscle and hamstring, it gets focused through the knee joint. my knee splays over and goes on my training partner's forehead and locks in. Okay, so it's a different kind of cross-face pressure. One of the big benefits of this is when I go to separate my training partner's arms, when Placido goes to turn out of the lock, he finds it more difficult when he goes against crossed feet. Okay, it's a better way of holding people in some cases when they go into a turnout. In addition, we know now that the braking mechanics of Judo Gatame are all about height and hardness. And it turns out, one of the great cliches of the sport, of course, we should pinch our knees together to get a better braking fulcrum. That's not true at all. You can have splayed feet and still create very, very effective brakes over the hip bone. Okay? And experience bears me out on this. There are many examples of people getting their arms badly, badly broken in cross-feet Judo Gatames with the knees splayed. So to quickly go over this again, if we have an opponent flat on his back, if we are going to go into the crossed feet option, and it is a good option and it does have some advantages, makes it harder for my opponent to turn out, and offers control of two shoulders instead of one, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to make sure that the cross-face leg is on bottom, okay, when we go to cross our feet. Secondly, we make sure we cover our training partner's shoulder. Put the calf directly over the shoulder. Try to avoid going underneath. Okay. Now, once we lock up here, our feet retract backwards and the knees pull in. When my opponent goes to move around, the cross is coming into me. The cross-face pressure comes from the outside of my knee, pushing into his forehead. A little bit different from usual, but it's still very significant. It can hold someone down. Now, from here, if we separate their arms and they go to turn out, it's difficult because of my crossed, locked feet here. And you can still hit a very effective break over the hip. Okay, let's make sure, because our knees are splayed, we use the bone, the hip bone, to create the braking fulcrum we want to get very strong and effective brakes. Okay, so this is a good example of how we can use cross feet to some benefit when we're working when our opponent's flat on his back. Okay, now let's contrast this with situations where you're underneath people. I'm not going to say it's 100% wrong to cross your feet when you work from underneath people with Judo Gatame, but it's my belief that you're better off with open feet whenever you work bottom position. I don't have any problem with my students using closed feet when they're on top, as we just demonstrated. Nothing wrong with that. It's not the only way of doing things, but it's one good way. But you do tend to lose a lot of control of your opponent's head when you try and do the same thing from bottom position, usually from guard. That's not to say it's 100% wrong. One of the most famous armbars of all time was Roger Gracie versus Jacare, and that was an example of crossed feet being used from the bottom position. Interestingly, Roger's a good friend of mine, and he often regrets using crossed feet in that situation. He said he could have done better if he had open feet. But the fact remains, he badly broke an athlete's arm using crossed feet from bottom position. So it's not like it's 100% wrong, okay? Don't get swayed by people who tell you it's completely wrong to cross your feet in Judo Gatame. It's a beginner's mistake. No, it's not. Some of the best players of all time have used it and used it successfully. Nonetheless, from bottom position, I do have a strong preference for both myself and my students to use open feet for reasons I'll now demonstrate. Okay, we have an opponent on top of us. We're working from guard, and we use any one of the various methods to go into a variation of Judo Gatame. When I go to cross my feet in this position, you find it much harder to keep your opponent's head down and force his head into an unnatural position. The knee cross face that we use from cross feet, it doesn't really have the same bite from bottom position, and I can't keep my opponent's head down to the same degree. So if my training partner goes to stand up, he can go vertical, and from here it's hard for me to get the bite that I want on my training partner's head. And if you look at the Roger Gracie example, that's exactly what happened. The arm broke quickly. Roger got a deep bite on the arm and got a strong break, but he wasn't able to stop the head continuing up, and at some point Jacare slipped out. Granted, he slipped out with a broken arm, but the point was made that he couldn't keep the head down. He couldn't sustain the break over time. Now let's contrast that with open feet. So in a situation where we've gone in using any one of the various methods of securing Judo Gatame, when I work with open feet, I get an ability to point down with my feet. This enables me to put my training partner's head into an unnatural position where both feet point downwards. Even when Placido stands up now, when he goes to posture up, it's a very, very difficult thing. There's so much more weight over the head, and this is going to make it so much easier for us in the long term to put people down to the mat and control the judo position. You get a far, far stronger ability to keep your opponent's head down with unlocked feet from bottom position. Remember, one of the great rules of Judogatami, you can always tell the direction of force on the part of my legs in a Judogatami by the direction of my feet. I can only point my feet downwards, signifying a downward force on my opponent's head if my feet are open. Okay, let's demonstrate this again. We've been saying in this video, you can always tell the force of a Judogatami by the direction of the athlete's feet. You'll see that in any given Judogatami, when I cross my feet, where's the force going? Up to the ceiling. So when Placido stands, it's very easy for him to go upwards in the same direction that my Judogatami is going. But when I use open feet, I can point my feet downwards. When he goes, revealed by the direction of your feet. When you go to cross feet from bottom position, that force will almost always be going upwards, and it enables your opponent to posture up and away from you. That doesn't mean you can't break a man's arm. Okay, as I said, one of the most famous arm breaks in history occurred just that way. But it does mean it's going to be hard to hold your opponent's posture down reliably over time. And even Hodger expressed regret for the choice of closed feet after the fact. So let's make a general rule here, okay? This general rule will be, if you're on top of your opponent and you're going for Judogatami, you have a choice between crossed feet and open feet. There's pros and cons to both. If you're on bottom, let's favor open feet. Okay, they'll give you a stronger control of your opponent's head and enable you to critically keep your opponent's posture downward. You'll be able to use the simple insight that where our feet point, the force of the Judogatami goes. So let's point our feet downwards to the mat, keep his head down, and you'll find you get better results. That's how I always look at this eternal debate over whether we should have closed feet or open feet for Judogatami. Now, one thing you will constantly see me advocating in the Judogatami position is the use of an elbow to prop yourself on as you control your opponent. Okay, I do it on both sides, and I like to see my athletes work with this kind of control. They play between the elbow and the hand, and as a result, they become very mobile and very secure in the position. I'm going to demonstrate exactly why I favor this so strongly. Whenever we get in on the attack in these situations, I like, as we've seen, to have asymmetrical legs and an elbow prop. I always put my elbow on the line of my opponent's hips. There's my opponent's hip line. That's where my elbow goes. From here, this gives me several great and very, very useful properties. The first is that at any given time, my opponent's legs are accessible. It's so easy. Okay, so if I have my elbow on his hip line, it's just one small movement of my ear towards his knee, and then from here we've got a hold of our opponent's leg with an outside scoop grip. Why is this grip such a big part of what we do? Well, if my opponent wants to come up from bottom position and get on top of me, it will require that his legs scissor. The bottom leg scissors under, top leg comes on top, and now from here he can get up on top of me. Okay? However, if I grip my opponent's leg, he will never be able to complete the scissor. He will be able to bring his body up to a 45-degree angle and no further. And this suits my game admirably. So from the prop, I come in and I scoop Placido's legs. When he goes to get up, I don't care how athletic he is. The most he will ever do is get up to this 45-degree position, and he will get no further. It's physically impossible. The only way for him to get up in this position is to fully scissor his legs, and that's exactly what this grip prevents. Once you gain confidence in this knowledge, you will be able to hold people even as they struggle with tremendous levels of resistance and fight like crazy to come up on top, but they never will. And you will always be able to return them to the mat and come back to a winning position. Okay, so once again, we start off, we put our hand through, we put a prop in behind us. If the resistance is mild and I just see him trying to come up towards me, then the power prop will be more than enough to stop him. But if the resistance is very, very strong, it's important that we grip this leg. Now when he fights to come up on top, the most you'll ever get up is 45 degrees, and you will always be able to return your opponent to the mat. What's the mechanism of mat return? Let's have a look at this now. As he comes up, watch my cross-face leg. I kink my legs and back heel. And as he fights his way up, watch my cross-face leg open. And as the knee opens, we easily put him down. We're now in an excellent position to go into the second form of control based on my arms. This is one where I go over my training partner's legs and pull his two legs in towards me. I put my elbow on his lower back and my cross-face leg comes off so that I can push myself up into a top position. Then from here, we find ourselves back in Jujigatami. Okay? I can always return back to the seated situation. And from here, I prop. He tries to come up. We catch. Once again, the cycle continues. Watch my cross-face leg. It opens. And as a result, we can easily put him down. In this way, you can maintain total control of your opponent's body. And there's very little that he can do to stop this form of total control of your opponent's shoulder and head. Now, we've looked at the mechanics of control in the Jujigatami position. Our general theme that we're trying to push on you is that Jujigatami is ultimately the story about breaking the elbow by first controlling the shoulder. There's no breaking the elbow without first controlling the shoulder. Everything is about my ability to get my hips in, maintain tight contact against resistance to my opponent's shoulder, and keep his head and shoulders pinned down on the ground. The moment you lose control of your opponent's head and shoulders, you've lost the whole game. What I want to do now is take all the little elements that we looked at of movement, leg position, etc., and just put them in a kind of semi-live demonstration for you so you can see how they operate in a typical Jujigatami situation. Placido is just going to start bottom Juji, and we start in a full Juji with our 2 feet across. We usually start symmetrical and a hand goes in. Okay. As I feel Placido trying to work his way out, you can see that the first thing I do is I go asymmetrical on my opponent like so. From this prop, he continues to work. Practice putting him down, scooping, returning him to the mat, putting our body weight on top, rocking up, controlling the hips. You see him fighting through. Tries to rotate out, catch, return him to the floor. We move our body on top of his, reclaiming the shoulder. He moves away from me. We walk our body in, and from here, we're learning to maintain the pin over time against resistance. Your ability to do this against resistance is probably the single most important skill that you can develop if you're going to call yourself a master of Jujigatami. Your opponent will always be looking to free his shoulder as a means of ultimately freeing his elbow. It's going to begin at the shoulder. Your ability to get to the shoulder and stay on the shoulder is the single biggest attribute which is going to make you successful in this position. Now, let's be very clear about this. When it comes time to finish Jujigatami, I have a distinct preference, and this is a big part of my coaching, for putting people down on their back. That is, without any question, the most controlling manner in which to finish Jujigatami. More people get finished there than all the other situations put together. Nonetheless, if you were going to call yourself a master of Jujigatami, you must be able to finish in any orientation within 360 degrees. Sometimes the finishes occur in rather chaotic situations, And I'd be a liar if I said you're always going to be able to put the other guy down flat on his back and finish from there. Sometimes you got to be able to do it where you've been hung upside down, pulled off the floor, face down, face up, underneath, top, bottom, left, right, rolling, and you still got to be able to straighten the arm and exert braking pressure. So let's look a little bit at this now. What are some key elements to effective braking when we're face down, face up, or on top of our opponent? Just lying down. Okay, so the preferred situation is one where our opponent has been put flat on his back. Okay, this is where the strongest and most controlling brakes occur from. However, there are going to come times you cannot put your opponent down like this, and you have to attack from other situations. Okay, the first one to look at is one where you have to go to break an arm and your opponent is on top of you and you're working from guard position. So if I have an opponent on top of me and we have successfully gone into a Jujigatami from the bottom position, and for whatever reason I was able to separate my training partner's arms, but let's say he has his right foot up, for example, and I cannot sweep him down, but I now have a chance to break him from bottom position. Should I bother to put him down? Absolutely not. Go right for the break right from here. Okay, absolutely, it can be done very, very readily. Some details on this. If I'm going to break from bottom position, it's critical that I put a lot of focus on putting his head into an unnatural position. If Placido's head is coming towards me, that's a terrible thing for my body's extension. I ultimately need to extend my body. I need to straighten my spine to break him. And if his head is coming towards me, it has an effect of rounding my spine. So that's the exact opposite of what we want. So what I want to do is I want my knee to push while my foot pulls. Okay? You know now that the direction of force of a Jujigatami is always revealed by the direction of my feet. So my cross-face leg, the foot points down, but I open my knee outwards. What this does, it takes Placido's head to the outside shoulder. That's the direction I want his head moving. Okay? If his head moves to the inside shoulder, he's curling my spine and restricting my ability to break. So what we want to do in these situations is put his head into an unnatural position, outwards, like so. I want my direction foot always pointing out and over his head. So when he goes to stack me, it's my direction leg that makes it difficult. What I can't do is have his head coming in towards me, my direction leg pointing in the wrong direction, and now there's no chance whatsoever of a successful break from bottom position. So to stop the stack, it comes from the torso leg pushing in the direction of the head. The cross-face leg putting his head into an unnatural position on the outside shoulder. He goes to stack me, and now his stack will result in the broken arm. Because I'm taking his head and I'm putting weight down over the head, and we've got a strong break now. Okay? So once again, what we can't have in these general situations is a situation where his head is driving inwards towards my head. That will round out my spine and prevent the extension that creates breaks. So, torso leg pushing out in the direction the toes are pointing. Cross-face leg, knee opens, pelvis rising, and that's going to create a strong frame. The more my body folds, the less effective I'm in these positions. So, as my hips rise, my feet point downwards. As he goes to stack me now, it's so difficult, and we get very, very strong breaks. I'm going to give you a recommendation. When you break from bottom position, put one shoulder on the mat. Don't try to push off your own neck and head. Push off your inside shoulder. What does this mean? I'll demonstrate from this angle so you can see what's going on. As I go to get stacked, I never work from two shoulders on the floor, and he goes to stack me, everything folds right over myself. When I go to extend, I come up on one shoulder, this one here. If my two shoulders are symmetrical, he goes to stack me, my legs fold right over myself. So from here, I come up on one shoulder. Now my head is relaxed. When he goes to to fold me now. It's so difficult, and we quickly get strong breaking pressure. I never want two symmetrical shoulders he puts stacking on me, and I just get folded immediately. To stop that folding, my leg's in good position, I come up on one shoulder, and from here it's a very strong break indeed. Now, that's when we're underneath people and breaking arms. What about situations where I'm belly down on Juji Gatame? Things get interesting here. On the face of it, these ought to be the strongest breaks because gravity is in your favor. You're literally sitting on top of his leg. And in certain situations, they can be very, very strong breaks indeed, but they come at a price. Your legs become very exposed to your opponent's second arm. Okay, that's why generally I don't favor these finishes very much. The mechanical power is there, but there's also some tactical vulnerability. So let's look at a situation where we've gone through into Juji Gatame like so. Okay, I'm face down, so there is body weight involved here. So these should be very, very strong. The problem is that my legs are right in front of Placido's right hand, and he can start pushing down on my legs and causing all kinds of problems now. So it's important, if we're going to break in these situations, that we keep a back heel with our legs. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate this from a different angle so you can see what's going on here. If my legs extend, Placido can easily put a hand on top, and from here start to turn, extract, etc., etc. So it's very, very important in these situations that we keep a strong back heel. Don't be lazy and expose your ankles to your opponent. We're always looking in these situations to form a satisfactory back heel. Now, from here, I always like to look towards my opponent's hips. Being purely belly down is not wrong, but it's hard for me to get full extension from here. It requires a big pullback on the part of my hips. When I come to a single shoulder, now I have an almost unlimited ability to take the arm through and get very, very strong breaks. Okay, you're generally going to find you get better results rather than being all the way down here. This is not 100% wrong, but it's hard for me now to get full extension with my spine. So instead, we go belly down towards the floor. And from here, we get very, very strong breaking pressure. In this way, we can get good results through 360 degrees. You must cultivate the ability to break from both bottom situation and prone, face down situations. They're not optimal. The optimal situation is always one where you're seated over an opponent who's flat on his back. So whenever you have the choice, put him in that supine position, put him on his back, and work from a seated position. It's the most controlling and the most high percentage. But understand that that ideal is not always going to be what you have to work with. So you must gain competency in breaking from bottom position and prone positions as well. Prone positions, focus on the back heel. Rather than being completely face down to the mat, face towards your opponent's legs. When you're underneath people, bear in mind the points you raised about being on a single shoulder rather than on two shoulders, and be very, very forceful with the application of your torso leg pushing towards his head and your cross-face leg putting his head into an unnatural position over the outside shoulder.
Now, we just looked at the mechanics of control, and we've seen that control for Juji Gatame begins at the shoulder. Ultimately, every Juji Gatame is a pin of your opponent's head and shoulders with your legs. That's what it comes down to. Now let's go into the next phase of the Juji Gatame control, and this is control of the overall position. What's required here? What is required is that you should be able to deal with changes in body position between you and your opponent, specifically his ability to get up on top of you and your ability to get up on top of him. I'll say that again, it's very important. There's an overall battle for position here, and ultimately that battle is top or bottom position. As a general rule, finishes from top position are slightly easier with Juji Gatame than finishes from bottom position, and so they tend to be favored. Your opponent knows that, And so often they will be looking to come up on top of you so they can exert stacking pressure upon you and reduce the likelihood of you finishing the Jujigatami. So we must be effective at, if someone comes up on top of us, sweeping them back down to their back. And if we feel the need arises, climbing our body on top of them. This is going to create cycles of top and bottom position, and you must be able to control those cycles. That's what it's going to take for you to be a successful practitioner of Jujigatami. Can you control the cycles of up, down, top, bottom in the Jujigatami position? Let's have a look at how we do this. Okay, we've got the basic Jujigatami. Both legs over, one hand in, and I'm propped up. Okay? No matter how good you get in this position, there's always going to be times your opponent gets the beat on you and he gets up on top. The moment that starts to occur, their game is always going to be the same. It's going to be to walk in with the legs and put stacking pressure over your body. Whenever we feel this happen, understand that we have an arm free to do good work with. As his stacking pressure increases, you can hear my voice changing as the pressure on my diaphragm increases. Now from here, I'm going to put my hand across my training partner's thigh and I'm going to bring my head out the back door. You can hear the relief in my voice as the pressure goes off my diaphragm. As I come out the back door, we're now in a situation where we can start to put him back down to his back. I'm going to start the ball rolling by pulling on this leg. My target is the far leg, but you can see it's currently out of reach. So I'm going to pull his near knee in towards me and it brings both knees closer. Now I reach over my training partner's knee and I pull his two knees in towards me. From here, watch my right knee. It comes in towards my own chest. And as a result, we can quickly place our training partner back on the mat. Let's have a look at that again. From a situation where we have the Jujigatami, just in like so, and my opponent successfully turns in on me, you can hear the pressure I'm under through my voice. Now my hand comes in here and my head comes out the back door. No longer am I under any physical pressure. On the contrary, it's very easy for me to pull his knee to my shoulder and bring the second leg in nice and close. Now, as I pull on the legs, watch my right knee. My right knee comes into my chest so that no part of Placido's body is left on the ground. He's 100% up in the air. As a result, it's very easy for me to place him down to the mat and reclaim my top position. Let's have a look at this again. We have the Jujigatami position. My opponent successfully turns in and begins to stack me. I come out the back door. I pull one leg towards me and then reach over the top and grip the second leg. Now my right knee comes into my chest so that his whole body comes up off the mat. Straighten out your whole body. And then from this position, my crossface leg goes in and we put our opponent down. Once again, we're in good position here for the Juji, but unfortunately our opponent gets up successfully. From here, I scoop outside the leg. I reach across, and now I focus on taking his whole body up into the air. Because his whole body has left the ground, it's very, very easy for us to place him down into a winning position. You've reclaimed the exact starting position you were in. You temporarily lost top position, but you had an effective game plan to reclaim it. And that's a big part of the key to understanding this position. Let's go further now into the idea of taking top position on an opponent.
Not only should I be able to reclaim top position if I lose it and end up on bottom, but I should be able to climb up on top of my opponent as well. Anytime we work in this situation, let's move around a little. The ability to climb on top of my training partner's torso is very, very important. The way we do it is by crossing his legs in towards us, and pulling and exposing his lower back. Now I take my cross-face leg, and that becomes my mechanism of heisting. And I heist up on top of my training partner. I turn my knee in like so, and I prop myself on my elbow on the other side of his body. Now from here, I reapply the cross-face leg and lock in place. From here, I have the option of tilting back where I came from, staying where I am, that puts a lot of pressure on him, or rolling through into the same move that we just saw. If my opponent vigorously turns me in this direction, I just put my head underneath my own armpit, and once again we find ourselves in that same situation we were just in. Let's go further out so you can see more of those details. From a situation where we start off controlling our training partner. From here, I reach for the far leg and pull it in. I control my training partner's hip. My cross-face leg becomes a heisting leg, where I push my body up on top of my training partner and reclaim the cross-face. I could just fall back where I came from. I could just stay where I am. But if my opponent goes to shift my body weight in this direction, look out, it's an easy thing from here. To put him up into the air and down onto his back once again. What are we developing here as a skill? We're developing the skill of being able to take, maintain, and reclaim top position regardless of where our opponent takes us. The positional battle in Judogatame from top to bottom position is one of the absolute most important for you to master if you're going to use this move against strong resistance. Most of your opponents are aware that it's typically easier to get out of Judogatames when you're on top than when you're underneath. And they will fight like dogs to get to top position on you. It is absolutely critical that you be able to use their legs and your arm as a mechanism to either keep them down or, if they do get up on top of you, reclaim the top position. Let's have a look at this in summary. We know now that the whole mechanism for our opponent to get up on top of us is the legs and his ability to scissor them. So the first thing we do once we get asymmetrical is we go and we catch legs. So when he tries to get up on top, it puts a limit on how far he can go and makes it easy for us to use the cross-face leg to reclaim. Once I get on top, you can solidify the position by climbing directly on top. So you're literally on top of his diaphragm. That's a tough thing for your opponent. You could put him under pressure here and just hold him down, but at some point you're going to want to finish and you may come backwards to go into your arm breaks. If your opponent should have the skills necessary to get up on top of you and start stacking, you want to be able to come out the back door at will, and then from here put him up in the air. Once he goes up in the air, we can always reclaim the position. Coming around. If, for whatever reason, we claim top position and our opponent rolls us on through, then even from here, we should be able to go through and reclaim that top position. Your ability to go through 360 degrees from top to bottom at will on a resisting opponent is going to be one of the key features that will make you a successful practitioner with Judogatame. These are the key positional skills which will enable you to dominate the mechanics of position. Now we're going through the mechanics of the Judogatame position. So far we've looked at the mechanics of control. We've seen that the focus of control is your opponent's shoulder. We've seen the mechanics of position, and we've seen that the focus of the mechanics of position is top and bottom. Now let's look at the mechanics of breaking. You can talk all day about control, you can talk all day about position, But at some point with Judigatami, you got to break the dude's arm. You got to go after the elbow. Now, when it's time to break someone, the focus is directly upon the joint you will be attacking itself, the elbow joint. Judigatami is probably the single clearest example of lever and fulcrum applied to breaking in the entire sport of jiu-jitsu. It doesn't get any simpler than that. There's a fulcrum, which is your hip, and there's a lever, which is your opponent's arm, and you break the stick, the lever, over that fulcrum. Let's have a look at the mechanical details that make for strong Judigatami breaks. I'm sure you've all seen crazy situations in top-level tournaments where people's arms get straightened out. It looks terrifying, and no one's arm gets broken. The guy escapes and goes on to win the match. It happens all the time. The difference between causing discomfort and the ability to cause a severe break are relatively small. Okay, a lot of people can cause discomfort. Not many people can cause a severe break. So let's go over now the mechanics of breaking. Okay, so you've gotten to the Judigatami position. You've done a good job of securing top. You dominated the positional aspect. You've done a good job of controlling the shoulder. You've dominated the control aspect. And now you've managed to straighten out your training partner's arms. We'll deal with how to unlock the arm soon. And the arm is straightening out, and it's time to actually break the guy. The crowd's going crazy, and you've got to do something, okay? This is what you've trained for all this time. It's hard to do this in the gym because you train with your friends, and now you're in a situation where this guy's not your friend, and you've got to break his arm. And you probably haven't broken too many people's arms before in the past, so how do you know you're doing it right? Well, let's understand a few wrong directions, which are often taught. Most people get taught to squeeze their knees together and take the hand down the center and apply braking pressure. Okay, Placido has above average flexibility, and you can see that when I apply this method, his pinky knuckle can easily touch my chest, and he's not under any particular duress. He's not under much stress at this point. As I go to raise my hips, I could put more and more pressure on him, and yet I'm still struggling to actually finish him here. Now, this is on a relaxed Sunday afternoon, and we're friends. If this was a World Championship final where we had bad intentions towards each other, it's not clear that I'd be able to break his arm by this method. I could certainly straighten his arm, but straightening his arm is not the same as breaking his arm. Okay? So what's gone wrong here? Well, first off, by squeezing your legs together and focusing on keeping your opponent's arm in the center, you have provided a rather poor fulcrum over which to break your opponent's arm. I don't care how strong you are, your adductor muscles in the inside of your thighs are still soft, no matter how hard you work them. The effectiveness of a breaking fulcrum is directly related to the height of the fulcrum and the hardness of the fulcrum. Say you wanted to break a pencil. I give you a choice between breaking it over a small stone versus a small piece of rubber. Which do you think would be the more effective breaking fulcrum? Of course it's the stone, because it's hard. The softer the fulcrum, the harder it is to break a lever over it. I don't want to use my soft muscles as a breaking fulcrum. Rather, I want to use my hip bone. So what I do is I look at my opponent's arm. I notice it's the right arm that I'm going after. So I want to take his right arm over my right hip. So I take his right hand, to my right shoulder. And I take his right elbow over my right hip. Now, for the first time, we're using a hard bone, the hip bone, as a breaking fulcrum. You will see that I take his hand from the center, which is not particularly effective, offline to my shoulder. Now that takes his elbow directly over my hip. Now, there were two elements involved in the fulcrum, the hardness and the height. If my 2 feet are on the mat, the height is not very impressive. And so my opponent begins to turn and he starts to relieve pressure. So what I want to do is to raise the height of the fulcrum. So I take my foot and touch it over my own foot. That immediately raises the height. You see my knee has gone higher. My right knee is now higher than my left, okay? So here, my left knee is higher than my right. That's a poor breaking fulcrum. I bring my foot up, and the situation changes dramatically. Now when Placido goes to turn out, it's so much more difficult, and the pressure we get is considerable. So once again, this is an iteration of what we call the right rule. If I'm going to break my opponent's right arm, I'm going to take his right elbow over my right hip and his right hand to my right armpit. 5 rights. So we lock up. I take his right hand to my right armpit. I take his right elbow over my right hip. I raise my right hip, and then from this position he goes to turn out, move out, etc., and we get tremendous braking pressure over the elbow. Okay? This right rule, or left if you're on the other side, is the key to your braking mechanics. So as always, I dominate the shoulder. I go in and I connect everything on the right hand to my right armpit. Even as we go back, the legs retract, and we find ourselves now in the perfect position to break our training partner's arm. Mastery of the right rule is the key element here. You must learn to substitute the poor adductor muscles for the hip bone. You must learn to misalign your opponent's hand from your center line to the relevant armpit. The right in the case of the right hand, the left in the case of the left hand. In these ways, you'll dramatically increase both the height and the hardness of the fulcrum over which you are hoping to break your opponent's elbow. These are the keys to braking mechanics for this incredible lock. Okay, let's go further into braking mechanics now. From a situation where we have an opponent down, we've seen the right rule. The idea being that if I attack my opponent's right arm, I want his right elbow going across my right hip, his right hand towards my right armpit. And in this way, we maximize the use of lever and fulcrum over our opponent. Now, let's understand something about what can go wrong when we take the hand in the wrong way and how it actually facilitates your opponent's escape. So often I see people, when they go in for their various breaking moves, they do a very poor job of controlling their opponent's wrist, okay? And you see people holding the elbow joint. I'm going to say something important here about holding the elbow joint. If I can connect my opponent's right elbow to my right hip, that's a good thing for control. Okay, and one of my favorite tricks to show students is this. As they separate their opponent's hands, right hand glues my opponent's right elbow to my right hip. Now, when Placido goes to turn out of the lock, it's physically impossible. Okay? This control of right elbow to right hip is a tremendous trick for keeping your opponent from turning out. When he goes to turn into me, my legs take care of the equation. And when he goes to turn out, my right hand takes care of things. Okay? Then in my own time, I can guide his wrist down and go 2-on-1 for the actual breaking position. Okay? But don't try to break with just one hand on the wrist. As secure as this grip is, it's not optimal for actual breaking. When it's time to break someone, always get 2 hands to the wrist and get the fulcrum high. And from here, we can get the kind of breaks we want. What we don't want to do is this. Start falling down with the hand in the center line, the elbow not controlled. Now there's no reason why my opponent can't just turn out in this direction and get up to his knees, and now he's got all kinds of problems. Okay? So often I see people falling towards the head and taking their opponent's hand in a situation where the thumb can easily point down to the floor, and that just facilitates their escape. Okay? If I fall in this direction, I must maintain control of his elbow to my hip, so that even when he points his thumb down and goes to rotate out, my whole thing is to rotate back to the cross position. I can fall towards the head, but I can't stay over the head. Now it's easy for him to turn out. So the whole thing is to go back to the cross position. Okay, there's a reason why it's called Juji Gatami. Juji means cross, and that's where the finish is from. And from here, I guide the hand back to the shoulder. We set the fulcrum high, and now we're in a winning position with the legs scissor rather than squeeze. Okay, let's understand the difference between scissoring legs and squeezing legs. So often you hear people say, squeeze your legs to finish the Juji Gatami. Okay, I don't care how good of an athlete you are. The muscles inside the thighs that govern closing of the legs are not particularly strong in human beings. Think about the difference in the gym between the amount of weight that a beginner can press with their legs, usually a considerable amount, versus the amount they can use on those silly machines where you close your legs. Even strong people can lift only very small weights on those machines. So too, in any situation where I'm trying to squeeze with my legs here, there's a limit to how long and how hard I can squeeze my knees together. But there is almost no limit on my ability to scissor the legs, okay? Because we spend all of our lives involved in pushing movements with our legs and pulling movements, running, walking, lifting, etc. So always, what I want to do when I go into the Juji position, I want to squeeze my knees together so much as I want to bring the leg back and then scissor my legs so that my right knee scissors back towards myself. Okay. Now when my opponent goes to pull his arm free, it's so difficult, and you've got complete control of your opponent's arm over the hip, and my scissoring legs create a very high fulcrum as opposed to my pinching legs, which create a very low and soft fulcrum. So we're always looking to come up and create that strong breaking position. Okay. Another key element to breaking in this situation, I will very often, once I take my opponent's arm down like so, and I employ this two-handed grip, I will often move my head out and away from my opponent, just like so. So my head moves away from his hand, and as a result, we're able to swim our elbow inside our training partner's wrist and sit up and lock my training partner's arm in place. I put my hand on my own thigh, and we've now made a switch to this overwrap grip. The overwrap is one of the single best ways to dramatically increase your breaking power with Juji Gatami. The overwrap guarantees that your opponent's right elbow will be locked where it should be, over your right hip. Once we lock in this position, it creates tremendous height on the fulcrum, so that as my opponent goes to rotate out, etc., it's almost impossible. And you create a very, very strong break indeed. Okay? Switching from a conventional hand on chest to the overwrap grip is one of the single best ways we can dramatically increase your breaking potential at almost no cost. Let's have a look at this again. In a classic Juji Gatami, I take my training partner's hand towards my armpit, and I use a 2-on-1 wrist grip where I dominate the top of the wrist and then reinforce it with the other hand. The idea is to dominate the direction of my opponent's thumb. If he dominates the direction of the thumb, he's going to get out. Look how he turns the thumb down. It's easy for him to move away. So we need to create situations where we dominate the direction of the thumb. The way I do this is I take my left hand to my opponent's right hand. Don't grab the wrist. Now his thumb can still turn. Come in and grab the hand itself. It's illegal to grab the thumb or any digits. However, it is fully legal to grab the padding around the thumb. And that's what my target is. So that half of my hand is on my training partner's wrist and half of my hand is on his thumb pad. That's the grip that I employ. Okay? So I go in and snatch it. I take his right hand to my right shoulder, and from here I double up. Now, from this position, I feed my hand inside, we sit up, and I clamp my elbow back to my own body and put my hand on my own thigh. From this position, I've got the perfect break. Even when he employs all the various tactics of turning away in this direction, etc., it means nothing. And you've got a tremendously strong breaking position. So once again, We separate our training partner's hands. We glue his right elbow to our right hip. So when he goes to turn out, it's going to be incredibly difficult. Now, we get the proper hand grip. Half of my hand on the wrist, half of my hand on my training partner's hand. We take his right hand to our right shoulder. Most of the time, you'll be able to break right here. But if for whatever reason, your break proves insufficient, we will thread our elbow inside and set up and come around the corner and lock in place. And then we go in for part 2. From this position, we get an even stronger breaking mechanic. This switch into the overhand grip can literally double the strength of your judogatame in situations where you have an opponent who's willing to go through severe hardship and escape conventional locks. Now, it's very, very important we understand anytime there's breaking involved of joints, there must be a sense of double directionality, that you must get two forces going in opposite directions upon the joint you're trying to break. A big problem that many people have with judogatame is there's only forces being applied in one direction. They just pull everything across the hip. So the hand is being pulled downwards. That's fine. You'll certainly cause a lot of discomfort for everyone, and you'll break some people with that alone. But you're always going to run into flexible people who can either turn and adjust their elbow position or just have enough innate flexibility in their elbow where it's not going to work. In these situations, you have to apply forces in two opposing directions. And this should always be the case with all of your major joint breaks. So how do we do this? One part is obvious. We all know we're supposed to pull the hand down. What's the force going in the opposite direction? Of course, it's your hips. When Placido is down in this situation, it's important I never let my juji degenerate just into a situation where I'm pulling down on the hand. There must also be a push up of my hips in the opposite direction. I'm taking his right hand down to my right side. That means that my hips have to push up slightly to the left in order to get a true break. Okay? If my hips lie down inert on the floor, it's almost impossible to get strong breaking pressure. So we always want to make sure everything comes up. I take my feet back and back heel. And from here, I bring everything up off the floor, okay? Only when I come off the floor and start pushing into my opponent do I get the breaks that I want, okay? You can see that pinching the knees is not the most important thing, okay? This is a point which I have to spend some time on. So often I hear people say, the key to a strong judogatame is pinching your knees, okay? The key to your breaking potential has very little to do with your knees and almost everything to do with the height of the fulcrum over which you're trying to break the arm. That means your hip has to come up. Your hip rising is far more important than your knees squeezing. When my opponent goes to lock in this situation, I'm squeezing my knees as tight as I can. In fact, my knees are almost touching, okay? However, my fulcrum is miserably low. So when I pull down on the arm, my opponent goes to spin out. It's easy for him, okay? And I'm squeezing pretty damn tight there. My knees actually are touching. Lower your left arm. You can see my knees are touching now. I can't squeeze any more than that. It's as close as they get, okay? And from here, it's no problem for my opponent to turn, and he's gone, okay? So what went wrong? I had my knees literally squeezing to the point where they physically can't go any closer than touching. That's as close as they get. And yet there wasn't sufficient breaking pressure on my opponent. He got out easily. I had his hand on my chest. It doesn't go down any further than that. I had my knees pinched as close as they can get. Nothing happened. It was because the height of my breaking fulcrum was inadequate. Okay, so what we're looking for once we get separation in these situations is to get the height of our fulcrum up. So I bring my feet in like so, and then I focus on raising the height of my hips. Okay? Now when my training partner goes to turn out, there's actually quite a big space between my knees, but it means nothing. We get the break immediately. What holds him in place is the directionality of force and the control of the direction of his thumb. Okay? I can squeeze my knees as tight as I can and touch them together. If the thumb is pointed down, that means nothing. He turns and he's gone. Here, my legs are far apart, but I'm controlling the direction of his thumb and his elbow on my hip. He goes to turn out and physically can't do it. Okay? The most he should be able to turn in this direction is get up onto his knees, but not be able to turn his shoulder down. That's all I care about. The danger is that he'll get up to his knees and turn his shoulder down. Now he's out. Okay? But even with my legs far apart, when I control him here, now when he goes to turn out, I still have control of the shoulder. It's not about your knee position. It's about the height of the fulcrum. And from here, I bring everything up and my pelvis comes off the floor. Now when he goes to turn out, now we get the breaks we're looking for. Okay? I cannot overstate the importance of this. All day you will hear people screaming, squeeze your knees, squeeze your knees. This has some effect as far as controlling your opponent's upper arm. It's not a bad thing to squeeze your knees, but it's not the contributing factor in breaking your opponent's elbow. That simple experiment, which I just did with you there, should demonstrate that to you. What determines your ability to break the elbow is the height and the hardness of the fulcrum and your ability to take your opponent's arm in a direction where he can't change the location of his elbow on that fulcrum. He can't just twist out, move out, turn into you, etc., etc. That's the key to breaking. You need a high and hard fulcrum. The hardest fulcrum you have is your hip bone. It's not the soft, mushy inner thigh muscles. The other key element is the height of that fulcrum. If my legs extend, it's hard to get a high fulcrum. So we need our feet back in tight. I like to place one foot here on his chest to get up even higher. Okay, and from situations like this, my knees can be apart, that's fine. Okay, so long as I control the right elbow on the right hip, he can go to turn all he wants. It means nothing. Now from here, we take everything in and look out from this position and take my hips off the floor. It's that action of taking hips off the floor that means I have two directions. I'm pulling down on the hand and I'm thrusting up with the hip. That's what enables me to control his shoulder. And from here, we get genuine breaks. He goes to move out now and he'll break his own arm. Okay? In those extreme examples where your opponent has extraordinary flexibility in the arm, that's when we recommend coming up into overwrap grips. And from here, getting even stronger breaking forces on your opponent. Okay? Once you understand the role of double directionality, how you need to do more than just pull your opponent's hand down, but must also thrust the hips up. And only when you get two forces going in opposite directions on the elbow, then you get true breaking mechanics. A huge part of my approach to breaking mechanics with submission holds, in particular joint locks, has to do with the idea of opposing forces. I'm sure many of you will remember from the leg lock video the idea that if we go in on our training partner's legs, we always want our ashigarami pointing in one direction and the force of our heel hook going in the other. So my ashigarami is pushing to the right while my heel hook is pulling to the left. And if I can combine those two forces, you'll create a tearing force, just as you would tear paper. Two hands going in opposing directions creates a good ripping effect on that paper. So too, when it's time to rip tendons and ligaments, we always want forces going in opposing directions. Nowhere is this more important than in the case of judigatami. But there's a problem. If you just lie down, Placido. You will often see that when someone goes to apply a judigatami, it looks like it's a single directional force because they have two pulling hands. As they go to apply the judigatami, they try to push up with the pelvis and pull down with the two hands. That's not wrong. It can get good results, but if you have hyper flexible opponents, or you have to get a very strong break in international level competition, you will often run into problems like this. You'll get flexible athletes where you can bring their knuckles all the way down to your chest, and as you try to push up with the hips and pull down with both hands, you simply run out of breaking room. You go all the way into your bridge and pull down on the hand as far as it'll go. It can't go any further than your chest, and nothing's broken. The problem here is that you have two pulling hands. Both of my elbows are down by my side, and the only push up I have is the push of my hips. If my hips don't go up far enough, then you simply fail to break your opponent. You get the arm extended, maybe you cause him some pain, pop his ligaments a few times, but you're not physically breaking the arm. What I want to see you doing is changing this so that instead of having two pulling hands, you have one pulling hand and one pushing hand. What does this mean? Okay, once we go to separate our training partner's arms and it's time to actually bring the arm into a breaking position, it's important that we have two hands on the wrist. Okay, so often I'll see people holding the arm in inconsequential ways when there's no control of your opponent's wrist. Now he just turns his thumb down and it's so easy for the guy to escape. Okay, so we always want as much as possible to put two hands on our opponent's hands and go to work. When we go to grip, we always want what we call a half hand grip, where half of my hand is on his hand and the other half is on his wrist, just like so. That half hand grip is a big part of what we do. Then the second hand covers it. Now, this is where things get interesting. When we bring the hand down, if I'm going after my opponent's right arm, my right arm will be a pulling arm. Okay, so I have one pull arm. It's right versus right. His right arm, my right arm pulling. And the task of the pulling hand is to pull his wrist to my right armpit. Then I put on my left hand and I go to a high elbow position so that one elbow goes down and one elbow goes up. This creates a right-handed pulling hand and a left-handed pushing hand, so that my left hand pushes down on my training partner's arm, while my right arm pulls down on that same arm. Okay. At the same time, I want to increase the height of the fulcrum. So I take my right foot and I place it right there on my left shin. This puts my knee significantly higher than it was before. And more importantly, it takes my right hip and puts it higher. So the fulcrum has become higher. Now, when we incorporate the push hand and the pull hand, one elbow goes high and one elbow goes low, we're going to have a great ability to create strong breaking pressure on our training partner. Okay. Again, don't limit yourself by having two pulling hands. Okay. Now, when we go to extend our opponent, you create pressure and extension, but not enough to actually break someone's arm. Instead, we take everything over to the side and we create this push-pull effect. I bring the fulcrum higher, and then I push down with my left hand and I pull with my right. At the same time, I take my pelvis into my opponent's elbow so that we create a very strong push-pull effect. What we have here is a pelvis going up and his elbow going down over my hip, courtesy of an arm pushing down and a hand pulling down. So we've got a force going up with my hips and a force going down with my hands. One pulling, one pushing. So that as the pull runs out of energy, the push takes over. Okay? Again, the pull hand can only go so far. You can see Placido has fairly good flexibility, and as a result, the pull runs out of impetus. That's exactly when the push takes over, and now we get the full extension we want. As always, my foot comes up to my training partner's head, and now we're in the perfect position to lift our hips and get strong breaks.